She grew up believing her existence was unnoticed. She drifted through shelters, streets, and hands that never held her by choice, until one day she was sold as an emotional caregiver to a comatose millionaire, a strange contract, paid in cash, signed by people who wouldn't meet her eyes. They said he couldn't feel anything anymore, but on the third night, when she held his hand and whispered his name, a single tear escaped, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The hallway was a sterile tunnel of marble and silence. The white ceiling lights didn't flicker, yet everything felt on the verge of collapse. Ilara walked slowly, as if each step might trigger an invisible alarm. She was led to the last door on the left. The woman in the burgundy dress looked at her like she was examining a defective part. "Your shift starts now. He's sedated. Speak little, touch less." The room was far too large for a single body. Arthur Sterling, the man in the coma, looked younger than she had imagined. Pale skin, dark hair, the neutral expression of someone who had been sleeping for far too long. On the shelf, closed books of poetry. On the wall, the unwavering line of a heart monitor. Ilara moved closer. "Hi. I'm just another one, I know." She placed her hand over his. It was in that touch that something shifted. He moved his fingers. Almost imperceptible, but it was real. Ilara wasn't born. She was abandoned. Left at a downtown bus terminal at 5 years old, a crumpled note pinned to her shirt. "I can't take care of her anymore." That's how she entered the system. Foster homes, new names, a case file number. For years, she heard more doors slamming shut than voices calling her name. She learned to be quiet, to observe, to smile for her own safety. She didn't know who she was, but she learned to be what they expected, or to disappear when that failed. At 14, she ran away from a group home after watching another girl get taken away by force. She slept on the streets, scrubbed bar bathrooms for day-old bread, cleaned shop windows in the dead of night. She never asked for help. She was ashamed to expect anything from anyone. At 18, she found a non-profit that trained at-risk youth. There, she learned how to care for people, the elderly, children, the disabled. She cared with a respect no one had ever shown her, even when no one was watching. "You have calming hands," an old woman told her once. That was all she wanted, for someone to see what she did and say something true. The invitation for the special job came from an elegant woman who appeared at the outreach center with a mysterious offer. "You'll be paid to emotionally accompany a patient. Nothing technical, just your presence. You have the perfect profile, discreet, quiet, experienced." A black car would pick her up. The contract was pre-signed, the money deposited in cash. The woman left her card and departed as if she had just made a delivery. Ilara hesitated, but she accepted, because she was tired of trying to live with dignity and always ending up back at square one, because the money was insane, and because a part of her, the part that still dreamed of being seen, wanted to believe that maybe this mysterious patient needed someone with nothing left to hide, like her. But stepping into that silent room and seeing Arthur there, motionless, intubated, surrounded by sensors, the doubt hit her like a punch. Why me? Why would they pay me so much for something any nurse could do? It was in that moment that the real conflict began. She was there to care, but something in that place told her this was much more than a job. It wasn't about the money, not really. Ilara had lived on less than nothing. She knew how to make a loaf of bread last for 3 meals. She knew how to sleep sitting up in a bus terminal, using her backpack as a pillow and faith as a blanket. She knew how to get by. She knew how to survive. What she didn't know was how to live when you weren't just tolerated, but wanted. When someone asked if you got home safe and actually waited for an answer. Since she was a little girl, all Ilara wanted was someone waiting for her at the door. A face, a hug, an "I missed you," but no one ever had. At 6, she invented imaginary mothers. She drew pictures of women with long hair and wide smiles. She'd tell the other kids at the shelter that her mom would be back soon. A mom who knew how to cook, tell stories, and fix her hair without pulling. At 10, she spent 3 weeks in a temporary foster home. The woman who ran it was named Ms. Evelyn, and she baked bread every Saturday. It was the most beautiful smell Ilara remembered from her childhood. One afternoon, Ms. Evelyn gave her an old book of poetry. "You seem like someone who listens to the quiet world," she said. But Ms. Evelyn died of a heart attack, and Ilara was sent back to the shelter. No one ever gave her a book again. At 12, she was placed in an adoptive home that didn't last. When she found out they weren't going to adopt her, she stopped speaking for weeks. "Strange girl," they'd say. It was in that silence she learned to live, between what wasn't said and what wasn't heard. But even in the silence, there was one thing she did every single day. She watched. She watched couples on the street, families on the bus, girls with their mothers picking out shampoo. She watched the way people touched each other. A handshake, a long hug, a look that said, "Stay a little longer." And she wanted that. Not the money, not the luxury, not a new phone. She wanted to belong, to be the reason someone breathed a little easier, to be the detail that's missed when it's gone. That's why the job in the comatose man's room was more than a paycheck. It was the chance to maybe, just maybe, mean something. Arthur didn't respond, but he was the first human being she could look at every day without fear of being judged. She spoke little, but when she did, she spoke with truth. On the second night, she pulled up a chair and began to read aloud a poem from a book she'd brought, hidden in her bag. What is left, if not the absence, dressed in silence? It was from memory. That same book Miss Evelyn had given her years ago. On the third night, she confessed that she knew how to sing, that no one had ever heard her, but she sang to herself on nights she was afraid. And when she held his hand and sang, something inside her trembled, as if her voice had finally broken through the walls of the world. She couldn't explain why she cared. Maybe because Arthur was the first person who didn't interrupt her, who didn't change the subject, who didn't offer empty advice. Even motionless, he listened with his body, with his skin, with the silence. And that silence, unlike all the others, didn't hurt her. With each passing day, Ilara returned with more resolve, more words, more memories. She told him about the shelter, about Miss Evelyn, about the Saturday bread, about how she wanted to open a small library one day, just for kids like her, a place that smelled of books and warm cake. It was an absurd dream. She knew it. She had no money, no education, no time. But she also knew something else. If someone like Arthur, a millionaire, motionless, lost in a deep coma, could still hear, then maybe the impossible could hear her dream too. And if that were true, just for a second, it was enough. Because someone who has lived their whole life as silence sometimes only needs a single echo to keep going. On the fourth night, Ilara noticed a camera in the corner of the ceiling. Small, discreet, positioned diagonally above Arthur's bed. She froze. She didn't remember them mentioning constant surveillance. She looked around. Were there microphones in the sensors? What if they were recording everything she said? The next morning, she tried to ask a new nurse. "It's just security protocol," he answered curtly. But his eyes avoided hers, as if it wasn't true, as if he was afraid to say more. Ilara began to move with more caution, as if every step left invisible tracks. Even so, she couldn't stop talking to Arthur. It was as if something in her needed to say it all, even if no one believed her, even if no one was listening. Starting the fifth night, the questions began. Catherine, Arthur's wife, appeared at the bedroom door with a tense smile. "How is he behaving with you?" "He doesn't react." "Excellent. Keep it that way. You're better when you don't expect anything." She smiled and closed the door. The air felt colder after she left. The following week, one of the physical therapists was suddenly fired. Another disappeared without notice. Ilara started to wonder what happened there when no one was looking. She tried to stop thinking about it, but she couldn't, Because Arthur was changing. Slightly. Slowly. It was the warmth of his skin, the frequency of his heartbeat. And one night, when she finished singing the same childhood lullaby, the monitor beeped out of pattern. Just once, but she saw it. The next day, Marcus, the oldest nurse, approached her during the shift change. He spoke in a low voice, almost a whisper. "I saw what happened last night." Ilara stood motionless. "Don't mention it to anyone. But keep going. Be discreet. And if it happens again, write everything down." I wrote everything down. Ilara started writing in a notebook hidden behind the books on the nightstand. She noted heart rates, breathing patterns, slight tremors. She called them invisible signs. But what was more visible each day was the fear. Catherine appeared more frequently, always with vague questions, long stares, false compliments. "You've been playing your part well. Just don't forget, you're here on contract, not for affection." On the 7th night, Ilara found something under the pillow of the armchair where she slept. An anonymous, handwritten note. Paper folded in 4. "If you feel like he's listening, leave." The others did. The others. How many? What happened to them? Ilara looked at Arthur. He was sleeping, or was he pretending? His eyelids didn't move, but something inside her said he was there, trapped, sunk somewhere no one else wanted to rescue him from. On the 8th night, she cried, not from fear, but from not knowing who to trust, not even herself. She began to doubt what she saw. Maybe it was all imagination. Loneliness. Loneliness is dangerous. She knew that. It makes you see signs where there are none. It makes you hear answers in the silence. But Edith, what if it wasn't? What if he was really trying to come back? And what if the people in this house wanted to stop that? What would she do? Run? Stay? Pretend? Ilara decided to watch more, to speak less out loud, to sing only in the intervals when the cameras shifted position. She began to rehearse everything she would say before speaking. That house was closing in on her. But every time Arthur sketched a response, minimal, almost invisible, something inside her reignited. The certainty that even if no one believed her, she wasn't completely alone in that room. Someone there, even without a voice, was also fighting to be heard. On Friday morning, Ilara was summoned to the main living room. Catherine was waiting, perched on a velvet sofa, legs crossed, holding a glass of juice as if it were champagne. Beside her, 2 men in suits and a young woman with impeccable blonde hair watched Ilara as if they were expecting something exotic. "This is the emotional caregiver?" the woman asked, not even hiding her mocking tone. Ilara stood frozen at the doorway. She felt underdressed, out of place, unwelcome. "Come closer," Catherine said with a restrained smile. "I want you to meet Arthur's daughter, Isabel, and the family's lawyer." The daughter. Ilara didn't know he had an adult daughter, or that she was in the house, or that this day would be her worst. "She's quite simple," Isabel commented, circling Ilara as if inspecting a piece of furniture. "You chose her, stepmother?" "I chose with criteria. Quiet, no attachments, nothing to lose." Ilara felt her skin turn to ice. The words pierced her spine like a silent dagger. No attachments, nothing to lose. That's how they saw her. That's why she was here. Not because they trusted her, but because she could disappear and no one would ask questions. Isabel stepped closer with a fake smile. "Is he still drooling, or have you managed to get him to recite a poem?" The laughter came in dry waves. Dry because it had no humor. It had venom. Ilara lowered her eyes. She kept her posture. She swallowed every word she wanted to scream. "You're paid to exist between 4 walls, dear. Not to think you're important," came the voice of the lawyer, distracted by his phone. "The ones before you tried to be more than caregivers. That was a mistake." Ilara bit the corner of her lip. "I'm just doing my job." "Good," Catherine replied. "Then go wipe his drool and sing to the ceiling. And please, no falling in love with the comatose patient. This isn't a daytime soap opera." Arthur's daughter let out another laugh. this time staring at Ilara with a glint of scorn in her eyes. Maybe she thinks if he wakes up, he'll fall in love with her. That would be comical. The millionaire heir and the former homeless girl. Those words broke something inside her. She felt small, smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Not because of the comparison, but because in that moment, she realized it was all a game. She wasn't there because anyone believed in her healing presence, but because her absence wouldn't matter. She was the perfect disposable woman. Ilara left the room without a word. The floor felt harder, the air thicker, the weight on her shoulders older than her own body. She entered Arthur's room and closed the door carefully. She sat in the chair, looked at him. "They think I'm a mistake," she whispered. "That you're a waste of time. That this is nothing." Her hands were shaking, and maybe it is. In that instant, something inside her wanted to leave. She grabbed her bag, where she hid the notebook with all her notes. She looked at the window. The sky was overcast, as if sharing her shame. But before leaving, she approached Arthur's bed. She ran her fingers slowly across his forehead. "If you're in there, if I'm not completely crazy, please give me a sign. Nothing, not a tremor, not a breath, not a tear." She waited a few more seconds, her eyes closed, trying to hold back the sobs, and then she turned towards the door. But before she reached the knob, she heard something, a low, mechanical click. It came from the heart monitor. She turned around slowly. The frequency was higher, almost imperceptibly. She looked at him, at his still face, at his steady breathing, and she knew someone was still in there. But outside, no one would believe her. And if she insisted, she could be dismissed. Or worse. Ilara put the notebook away, straightened her posture, and wiped her tears with the sleeve of her shirt. She opened the door and crossed the hall like someone returning to a battlefield. As she passed the living room, she heard Isabel's laugh again. "She won't last a week. Want a bet?" But Ilara didn't look back. Inside her, what was once just a desire to belong was now turning into the seed of something new. Something between pain and resistance. Because even in silence she knew they could laugh, they could doubt, they could even send her away. But only she had heard that change in the monitor. Only she had seen the slight furrow of his brow 2 nights ago. And only she seemed to see that, behind all that coldness, there was still a soul fighting to return. That night, Ilara took her time going up to the room. She sat in the mansion's backyard on an iron bench covered in rust and dew. The sky was clear, but the cold squeezed her chest more than her skin. What was she doing here? She thought about everything she'd heard hours before. Isabel's laugh, Catherine's cutting gaze, the way the lawyer treated her as if she were invisible, or worse, as if she had never existed. Quiet, no attachments, nothing to lose. Those words echoed, like a brand, a sentence. Were they right? Was she just being foolish again, believing she could be important to someone? Were all the things she felt in the room, the signs, the small movements, the altered heartbeats, just a product of her own loneliness? She sat there for almost an hour. The night breeze rustled the tree branches, but nothing stirred inside her. Everything felt stagnant, dead. She went back inside with heavy steps. The clock in the hall read 2:42 a.m. No one in the corridors, just the low hum of a fan and the distant breathing of someone sleeping on another floor. When she entered Arthur's room, the world shrank. There was silence here, but a different silence than in Catherine's living room. It wasn't the silence of superiority. It was the silence of waiting. She approached the bed. "Did you hear what they said today?" Her voice came out hoarse, tired. "That I'm just another one, that you're just a body, that I am nothing." She sat in the chair, watched the green line on the monitor. Continuous, stable, mechanical. "They say the others left, that they disappeared, that they went crazy." She closed her eyes. "Is that what I'm becoming?" For the first time, she was afraid of herself, afraid she was seeing things no one else saw. Afraid she was creating meaning where there were only automatic reflexes. Afraid she had grown so attached to the one human being who couldn't answer her that she'd forgotten she was still real. And yet she couldn't leave. "I have nowhere to go back to, Arthur," she said softly. "I don't have a mother or a father or anyone waiting for me. But still I stay. I come back here every night. I sing, I talk. I tell you my fears, my dreams. And you don't answer." She stood up slowly, went to the corner of the room where she kept her backpack hidden behind a curtain. She took out a small, worn, blue-covered notebook. Inside were pages scribbled with times, observations, short phrases. 10:04 p.m. Frown lasted 1 second. 9:58 p.m. Heartbeat increased during reading. 11:22 p.m. Deeper breath after song. She flipped through the notebook. "I wrote it all down because I needed to believe it wasn't just in my head." She took a deep breath. A tear fell onto the page. "The first since that morning. You're the only one who didn't turn away when I talked too much, who didn't call me crazy, who didn't try to reduce me to a job title." She sat again, closer to him. "When I was 7, I used to fall asleep afraid I'd forget my own name. Nobody called me by it. I'd repeat it to myself every night just to remember I existed." She rested her forehead on the sheet. "Now, every time I sing, it's like I go back to that place. Only this time I'm not alone." She was silent for a few seconds. Then, for the first time that night, she began to sing, not loudly, not a performance, just her and the memory. It was the song she learned from Miss Evelyn, the woman from the foster home, the one with the bread and the kind eyes. "Sweet is the night when the world falls silent, and only those who feel know how to listen." The melody was simple, a lullaby invented by someone who never had a cradle. As she sang, the words came out with more pain than melody, but she didn't stop. Halfway through the song, she felt something strange, not in his body, in hers, a warmth in her chest, a will to continue, even without knowing why, even without knowing if it made any sense. "I'm tired of being an echo, Arthur. I want to be someone who matters, even if it's just to one person." She stayed there, seated, her eyes closed, feeling her own heart beating fast. The monitor beside them remained steady, stable, as if ignoring everything, but she knew. She knew that even if no one else believed it, there was something between them that couldn't be explained by wires, tubes, or protocols. A space where silence was listening, where touch was speech, and where, maybe, love didn't need words. Have you ever felt like you were talking to the world and no one was answering? Have you ever had to keep it all inside just so you wouldn't be called weak or crazy or dramatic? If you've ever cried in silence, just comment yes. It's the only way I have of knowing you're out there, on the other side, feeling this with me. The next night, Ilara returned to the room with a heart torn between exhaustion and hope. She no longer knew if she was acting on faith or stubbornness, but she was there, for the 9th day in a row, in the same simple clothes, with the same careful steps, with the same silent wish, for that silence to break, even for a second. Arthur was still there, motionless, but slowly she had started to treat him like someone who was present, not a body, not a clinical case, someone. That night, she brought a small flower she'd found on the back lawn, a reddish hibiscus. She put it in a small glass cup beside his bed. "I thought it was beautiful. I thought the room was too cold." She spoke without expecting a response. She straightened the sheets, checked the sensors as Marcus had taught her, and sat in the chair. She pulled out the blue notebook, wrote, "Wednesday, 9:13 p.m., flower on the nightstand, skin slightly warmer." She closed the notebook and sat in silence. She remembered something she hadn't thought of in years. When she was 8 at the shelter, she'd gotten a box of colored pencils. One of the caregivers said it was a donation. Ilara couldn't draw, but that week she drew every day. She drew what she wanted to see: a house, a porch, a smiling face. A week later, one of the other girls tore up all her drawings out of jealousy. Ilara didn't cry. She just stopped drawing, but in that memory she understood. Even when everything is destroyed, we keep creating, because what we feel has to come out somehow. "I wish I could show you those drawings, Arthur," she said. "I wish I could show you who I was before I learned how to hide." She moved closer, sat on the floor beside the bed, leaning against its side like a child seeking a comfort she doesn't have. And she began to sing. It was a song she'd made up on the street, one night when she was almost grabbed by a man who was following her. Back then, she had hummed the melody just to hide her fear. Now, she sang it slowly, as if healing herself with every verse. "On the nameless street, I hid from the pain, but in the sound of my voice, there is still love." And it was in that instant that she felt it. A touch, subtle, light, like a butterfly's wing on the back of her hand. She stopped singing, looked. His hand was still resting on hers, but not like before. Now, there was an intention. She held her breath. "Arthur?" Nothing. She squeezed back, gently, afraid of breaking the moment, and then a second touch. It wasn't a reflex. It wasn't a spasm. It was him. It was him. Her blood ran cold. Her eyes welled up. Her heart raced. She knelt in front of him. His eyes were still closed, but there was a slight tension in his jaw, an almost expression. "You're there, aren't you?" He didn't answer, but the frequency on the monitor wavered. A sharp, brief sound. She sat down slowly. They're going to say it was a coincidence, a reflex, a muscle contraction. She grabbed the notebook, wrote 9:47 p.m., second touch, deliberate, synchronized with contact, after song. She closed the notebook firmly. She couldn't tell anyone, not now. Catherine would find a way to get her out of there, and she couldn't leave. Not now. Not when something was finally beginning to breathe in the most unlikely of places. For the next few minutes, she didn't speak. She just stayed there, sitting beside him, holding his hand calmly, as if holding a secret. The silence of that early morning was different. It wasn't the emptiness of abandonment. It was the silence of something new being born, and for the first time, Ilara felt that her presence was being felt, that her voice was not lost, that someone even trapped in an inaccessible place was trying to say, "I hear you." She lay her head on the blanket, her face turned toward him, eyes closed. "If you can hear me, just know that I'm not leaving. Not for a contract, not out of fear, but because now she was coming back too." The following night, Ilara arrived at Arthur's room differently, not in her face or her clothes, but in the way she walked. Less hesitation, more presence. Something had changed, not in him yet, but in her. She knew something had happened. She had felt it, recorded it, seen it, and even if no one else believed it, for the first time in her life, that didn't stop her from continuing. She sat in the chair, not with the weight of someone cowering, but with the lightness of someone who endures. She opened the notebook, noted the date, the time, observed his heartbeat stable, a little higher than the standard. She made a move to sing, but took a deep breath first. She wanted to see if he would react without a stimulus. Nothing. That was okay. She was learning that answers didn't always come right away, but they came. She took a book from the clinic's shelf, one of old poems. She began to read in a low voice. "If I fall asleep without a name, shout mine. Because sometimes it's the sound of another that saves us from absence." She paused. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She didn't expect a response, but her eyes searched for his anyway. They were closed. Still, there was something different. A tension in his eyelid, as if he were listening from inside a dream. On Monday, during the shift change, Marcus called her over discreetly. "Have you noticed anything different in the last few days?" "Maybe." He nodded, looking around. "Are you brave?" "For what?" "To keep going. Even if they call you crazy." She held his gaze. "I've been called worse." Marcus gave a slight smile for the first time. "Then don't stop. But be careful. The house listens." That night, she wrote a poem for Arthur. One of the few times she had the courage to create something of her own. "If I am only silence, listen to me with your chest. If I don't answer, It's because fear speaks first. But if I touch your hand, it's because I still believe. She read it to him, even knowing the cameras might be recording. But now, she didn't care as much. The truth was, Ilara was beginning to transform. Not because someone told her she was important, but because, inside that room, she was starting to feel that she was. Arthur was changing too. On the third day after the touch, his fingers moved again. This time, for longer. She pretended not to notice in front of the other nurses. But that night, when she was alone with him, she knelt beside the bed. "You heard me again, didn't you?" And he squeezed, subtle but firm. Ilara started sharing not just memories with him, but plans. She talked about her idea for the library for street kids. She told him she wanted to go back to school, but was afraid she wasn't smart enough. She said that, as strange as it sounded, she felt closer to him than to anyone she had ever known who was alive. And he listened, not with words, but with presence. Every time she spoke, his vital signs fluctuated. The sensors picked it up, but no one commented. Or they didn't want to see. On Friday, Catherine appeared suddenly in the room. "I've been observing your conduct. Is something wrong? You're spending too much time in here, creating intimacy." Ilara kept her face neutral. "It's what you paid me to do, isn't it? To care for him emotionally." Catherine smiled. "Caring is not getting involved. Don't forget, you are an employee, replaceable." Ilara smiled back. "We all are." Catherine stared at her for another second, then left, without another word. That night, Ilara was afraid. But it was a different kind of fear, not the fear of being fired, the fear that if she left, Arthur would fade away for good. "If you're still in there, promise me one thing." She held his hand with both of hers. "Do whatever you can to stay. For you, for me, for everything that can still be different." And then, as if in response, his fingers moved, this time with more clarity. And Ilara smiled. She was no longer the girl cowering in the corner of the shelter. She was the woman who was helping someone come back. And in the process, she was coming back to life herself. It was the middle of the night. It was raining. The sound of water streaming down the windows made the house feel even more isolated from the world. Outside, everything seemed to be sleeping. But inside Ilara, nothing was at rest. She felt she was close. She didn't know to what, but she felt it. Arthur was different tonight. His face warmer, his breathing a little deeper. The heart monitor fluctuated at irregular but constant intervals. Ilara watched the smallest details. She wrote them down. She waited. She knew she had to act, that she could no longer pretend it was just her imagination, that she couldn't be cautious anymore. What was happening was real, but the fear was real too. That same afternoon, Catherine had done something unexpected. She handed her an envelope. "You fulfilled your function," she had said. "You can leave tomorrow. The final payment is in there." Ilara didn't answer. She didn't open the envelope, but she knew it wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. Someone there had noticed what she was doing, and they wanted to cut the thread. She spent the rest of the day wondering, what if I leave? Who else will stay with him? Who will know he tried to come back? That night, she decided she wouldn't leave without a real try. One last time, with everything she had. She took a deep breath, fluffed the pillows, closed the door, turned off the main light. Only the small corner lamp remained on, casting soft shadows on the walls. She approached the bed, sat down. She picked up the blue notebook, opened it to the last blank page. But she didn't write. She closed it, placed it on the nightstand. She held his hand with both of hers. She felt the warm, living skin. "Can you hear that rain outside, Arthur?" A pause. "It sounds like the noise it made on the roof of the shelter. I was scared, but I pretended I wasn't, because if you showed fear, someone would make it worse." She gave a sad smile. "I think I've spent my whole life trying not to look scared. And now, here with you, I can admit it. I am scared of leaving you, of you never coming back, of having made it all up." She breathed, felt her eyes sting. "But even with the fear, I'm here." She stood up, pulled the armchair closer to the bed, sat down facing him. Tonight is going to be different. Tonight I'm not going to sing, or read poetry, or pretend this is just a job. She took out a small pocket recorder, the kind you get at a flea market. She pressed the red button and began to speak. This is a record of the last attempt. My name is Ilara. I'm the woman they said would be good for nothing but obeying in silence. The one you thought could be bought with an envelope. She looked at Arthur. But today, I'm here as someone who knows she is witnessing a miracle. One that nobody sees, that nobody wants to see. But that is real. She squeezed his hand tighter. Arthur, if you're in there, even if it's in a dark corner of your mind, I need you to listen to me now. She closed her eyes. Remember the flower I left here? You didn't see it, but maybe you smelled it. It was a hibiscus. They say it's a flower of resilience, of rebirth. She inhaled deeply. If you can come back now. Give me a sign, a sound, a movement, anything. Silence. She waited. Nothing. The seconds felt like hours. The rain outside grew heavier. The windows vibrated. She let go of his hand, lowered her head. Tears fell. 1, 2, 3. Uncontrolled. Voiceless. I'm sorry if I believe too much. But then, a sound. Not from the rain, not from the monitor. A sigh. She looked up. Arthur had moved his lips. Arthur? She moved closer. His face had changed. It was no longer neutral. His left eyelid was twitching. His jaw tensed slightly. She grabbed his arm. Arthur, it's me, Ilara. I'm here. And suddenly his fingers squeezed hers, firmly. The monitor went off. Heart rate soaring, brain activity accelerating. Is it really you? She whispered, barely able to believe it. His eyelids began to open, slowly, like someone waking from a 1,000-year sleep. His brown eyes were revealed, confused, weak, but alive. He blinked, looked around, then his gaze fixed on her. They stayed like that for a few seconds. An entire world fit into that silence. Then he spoke, his voice weak, hoarse. You sang to me? She held back a sob, but it was too late. Yes, every night, until today. He closed his eyes, a tear rolling down his cheek. I heard you, but I couldn't get back. It was dark, but your voice, it was pulling me. She rested her forehead against his. Their tears mingled. You came back, Arthur. You did it. He tried to smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was there. It was you who brought me back. She held his hand tighter. Now, it was real. No longer a suspicion, no longer intuition, no longer silence. Arthur was awake, and the only thing that had broken through the walls of unconsciousness had been the voice of a woman the entire world had learned to ignore. The digital clock on the wall read 3:17 a.m. when Marcus entered the room. He stopped at the door, frozen. Arthur's eyes were open, weak, yes, but alive. And Ilara was holding his hand, as if she were holding her own soul. Marcus, she said, her voice trembling. He's back. The nurse didn't move for a few seconds. Then he walked in, approached slowly and checked the vital signs. He confirmed everything, the heartbeat, the brain activity, the reflexes. Arthur blinked, turned his head slightly toward him. You're the nurse. Marcus stepped back, shaken. He'd never seen anything like it in all his years on the job. I'll call the doctor on duty. Wait, Ilara pleaded. You know what will happen if Catherine finds out before the right time? He stopped. She already tried to get you out of here. Now with him awake, she'll say it was a coincidence, that he was going to wake up anyway, and she might try to stop him from saying anything. Ilara nodded. Arthur, with effort, whispered, They lied. About what? Marcus asked. About everything. My accident, the will, the previous caregivers. His voice faded, tired. The effort was obvious. Marcus took a deep breath. I record everything. I have internal security cameras that aren't on the official floor plan. I installed them myself after Marina disappeared. I'm just missing one thing. He looked at Ilara. Someone brave enough to expose it. Ilara didn't hesitate. I am. The next morning, the news began to circulate internally. Arthur Sterling was showing signs of consciousness. The doctor in charge, pressured by the evidence, scheduled an immediate examination. Catherine arrived before noon. She swept into the room like a smiling hurricane. "Ilara, they said there was a reaction. How wonderful, a breakthrough at last." But when she saw Arthur awake, looking directly at her, her expression froze for a second. "Good morning, Catherine," he said, his voice low but firm. She didn't respond immediately. She walked toward him, forcing a smile. "My love, you're back. This is a miracle." Arthur didn't answer. He looked at Ilara, then at Marcus, then fixed his eyes on her again. "You knew I could hear." "Of course not," she said theatrically. "If I had known, you kept me here in silence, almost erasing me." She took a step back. "Arthur, you've been through a trauma. You're still confused." "No, I'm not," he said. "And if you try to silence me again, there are people listening now." Catherine left the room without another word. That afternoon, the video from the room's security camera, installed by Marcus, hidden in a lamp, was delivered to the lawyer who was still loyal to Arthur's family. The video clearly showed it all. The first reaction, the first movement, Ilara's voice, his words. 24 hours later, the headlines began to appear. "Silent hero. Millionaire wakes after nearly a year, thanks to the voice of his emotional caregiver." Ilara Vance, formerly homeless, recognized as key in pharmaceutical heirs recovery. Soon, the mansion was swarmed with reporters, cameras, speculation. Catherine hid upstairs. Isabel, the daughter, tried to deny the news. She said her father was already improving before Ilara arrived, but the video left no doubt. Ilara was called for interviews. She refused them all. She said she didn't want fame. She just wanted Arthur to be okay. Meanwhile, Arthur, still weak, began to write. He asked for paper, a pen, and he started documenting everything he remembered. The conversations he overheard while in the coma, his wife's intentions, the forced silence, the caregivers who vanished. One by one, the names resurfaced. Marina, the first, disappeared. Cynthia, sent to a psychiatric clinic without a proper diagnosis. All of them discarded. The investigation was reopened. A week later, Catherine left the house. She left with a lawyer. No bags, no statements. She was never seen by the staff again. On the last night of that cycle, Arthur asked to be alone with Ilara. He was still in bed, but his eyes had more light. "Do you know what brought me back? Every time I heard your voice." She didn't answer. She waited. "It was the way you spoke, without explaining yourself, without trying to prove anything." She smiled. "It's the only way I know how. When everything went dark, your voice was like a thread, and every word you spoke was a hand pulling my body back to life." She held his hand. "I just wanted someone to listen to me, and I listened," he said. Even when I couldn't answer, the two fell silent. But this time, it wasn't a silence of pain. It was a silence of victory. Not loud, not televised, but real. The next morning, Arthur insisted on giving an official statement, surrounded by doctors, lawyers, and reporters. But when it was his turn to speak, he pointed to Ilara. "Everything I have to say, she already said." When no one wanted to listen, the world that had once ignored Ilara was now listening, and those who tried to silence her existence now had to deal with the echo her presence left behind. Ilara was never the kind of person stories usually put at the center. She was the silent extra in the background, the one who cleans the floor, serves the coffee, and disappears before the final credits. But in that house, before a man in a coma, without him saying a single word, she changed everything, and she did it by being exactly who she had always been, without applause, without a resume, without approval. She understood there for the first time that to exist truthfully is an act of resistance, and that there's something stronger than being heard. It's continuing to speak, even when the whole world pretends you haven't said a thing. Because when no one expects anything from you, every gesture becomes a miracle. The greatest lesson Ilara took from those days wasn't that she saved a rich man. It was that she saved herself by choosing to stay. She could have left. She could have opened the envelope, taken the money, and disappeared like the others. But she stayed, even when she was afraid, even when she was humiliated, even when she thought she was going crazy. She stayed, because staying was the only way not to disappear again. And Arthur, by waking up, didn't just bring back his own consciousness. He brought the silent proof that affection is more powerful than contempt, that presence heals where medicine fails, and that, yes, the soul listens even when the body is silent. Ilara learned that dignity doesn't come from what you're given. It comes from what you refuse to give up on being, even when no one chooses you, even when no one listens to you, even when they say you're replaceable. She no longer needed an audience or approval or a yes at the end of every sentence. She needed, and now she knew it, just one reason to continue existing with wholeness. And sometimes that reason is in the hand we hold, in the story we tell, in the flower we leave beside the bed of someone the entire world has already given up on. The world can try to silence what is small, what is invisible, what has no first or last name, but it cannot erase what is true, because what is true endures, even in the dark, even alone. And when it finds someone willing to stay, it begins to shine again. 2 months after Arthur's awakening, the mansion was unrecognizable. The main gate, once closed to the world, now opened weekly for a group of children from a local non-profit. The silent rooms were filled with the sound of small footsteps, shy laughter, and curious voices asking about everything. Where Ilara used to sit every night, there was now a bookshelf, small but full of colorful children's books, and among them a blue notebook, its original notes preserved in plastic, a symbol of everything that began there. Ilara never wanted fame or a title or more money than she needed. But she accepted an invitation from Arthur to coordinate the family's new social project, focused on emotional literacy and active listening for vulnerable youth. They called the project The Flower by the Bedside, her name for it, his idea. Arthur was still undergoing rehabilitation. He was learning to walk again, to eat with his own hands, but he made a point to be present at the meetings, even if only for half an hour. "I came back because someone stayed when everyone else had left," he would tell anyone who asked. The press lost interest over time, as it always does. But for those who lived it from the inside, it was never a disposable story. It was one life that changed, and others that began to change because of it. Catherine, no one heard from her again. The last rumor was that she had left the country with a new lawyer and a different last name. No charges were ever finalized. No official accusation ever stuck. Money always knows how to hide. Isabel, Arthur's daughter, appeared once to sign documents with her father. Cold, formal. She played her part and left without looking at Ilara. Perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of an intact arrogance. And Ilara? She didn't become a celebrity. She didn't want to. But she became something much bigger. A role model. For the girls who, like her, thought they only existed as long as they obeyed. For the boys who learned to be silent before they even learned to speak. For all those who live in the space between abandonment and hope. Today, she walks with a firmer step. She looks people in the eye. And when they ask who she is, she answers calmly, "I'm the one who stayed." Because sometimes staying is the most revolutionary act anyone can commit. And because of it, other voices began to be heard, even the ones the world tried to erase. If this story touched you, if at any point you felt a lump in your throat, leave a like. It's the most beautiful way to tell me it was worth telling. Now tell me, what city or country are you watching from? I read everything, I really do, and I always respond with care to those who comment. And if you believe in the power of stories like this, subscribe to the channel. This is just getting started, and every subscription gives me the strength to continue. Don't leave yet. Choose one of the stories on the screen, and I'll meet you in the next video.